I used to mind map in a crazy, disorganized, and overwhelming way that often led me to not even be able to use the material that I had produced from my mind until I met a man and took seriously his guidelines, someone as passionate about mind mapping as I am about the memory palace technique, and then everything improved rapidly. And the best part is that I'm still enacting some of the things from one powerful mind map that I created in his presence. Hey there, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier from magneticmemorymethod.com. Thanks for joining me to talk about mind mapping. What is it? How can it help you? Can it help you improve your memory, your focus, your concentration? The answer is absolutely yes to all those things, but there's even better and there's even more. So if you like all things related to the mind and optimizing it for learning and remembering as fast as possible, make sure to get subscribed, hit that thumbs up, and let's go, because mind mapping is so rich, so powerful, so wonderful, and I know you're gonna love some of the tips and secrets and little things that I found out along the way. So what the heck is mind mapping anyway? Let's get a definition going. It's a simple, visual way to organize ideas on paper, or at least on a screen, that allows you to maximize clarity of comprehension and the ability to recall the information. To do this, mind maps typically focus on one central idea, and then they elaborate that concept, typically in a clockwise or counterclockwise fashion, in space. Now, as you'll see, it doesn't have to necessarily be in a circular format, but the idea is that you have a radial sense or a radiating sense of sub-ideas coming from a central idea. Again, to maximize focus on the idea and clarity about what that central idea is, and to enhance your memory of what's going on there. Some people credit the very earliest appearance of mind maps back to the 3rd century with the philosopher Porphyry of Tyros. What a great name. Now, it also shows up in the work of Ramon Llull, it shows up with Isaac Newton, it shows up with Leonardo da Vinci, and it shows up really in many, many different ways depending on how you want to define mind map. Because even pre-visualizing a movie, in some sense, the movie is a central concept, and then when they chart it all out visually with, comic book drawings and so forth, they are essentially mind mapping out that movie. However, that's not generally what we mean, and it's not what the earliest examples look like. They are literally a central idea that is being radiated out in some sort of external structure in order to maximize comprehension and recall. In the 1960s, scientists Alan Collins and Ross Quillian took what they were doing with semantic network ideas and they produced a thing that they called the mind map. But it wasn't really until Tony Buzan, who I believe was working as a psychological consultant at the time, popularized this idea of having a central image and radiating out from that in terms of being able to get it not only into multiple books, but also onto TV through the BBC, I believe it was.
Let's assume that you're in a situation in which the lecturer is particularly bad.
Tony Buzan developed his idea through multiple books and programs, culminating in Mind Map Mastery, which was the final book I believe he published in his lifetime before he passed away, unfortunately. And this has been an incredible loss, but at least we have this wonderful guide to refer to as a way of just bringing it all together. And he did a masterful job in Mind Map Mastery. It's absolutely fantastic. And Tony's idea, if I can revert to first name basis because I knew the guy and he gave me the Warrior of the Mind emblem for outstanding contributions to global mental literacy, one of his ideas was that mind mapping helped unlock a huge portion of the brain, and that's why the Warrior of the Mind emblem is a brain cell, because he wanted all of us to become warriors of the mind, which I believe is enabled by operating with mind mapping, and it has certainly helped me, and I doubted it for a long time that if you followed these particular rules it was going to somehow help you better than all the other ways that you could mind map. And Tony's criticism of other kinds of mind mapping really makes sense when you dig into it, because a lot of them are devoid of color, they're devoid of flow, they're devoid of the kinds of things that would deeply engage you both in creating them and then later looking at them. And that's the problem with my early mind maps, is that they often were exactly that, devoid of color, devoid of flow, and they were hard to interpret because of how that I had tried to cram so much stuff in them. So when I started to follow his principles, I got a lot more out of both creating them and engaging with the ideas, but then also being able to implement and put the ideas on those mind maps into action. And in fact, most of my videos ever since have had a mind map involved in terms of putting them together, either for scripting them or just actually literally creating the videos from mind maps. And using a mind map to help you with a video is part of what Tony Buzan taught as presenting from mind maps. You might not see the mind map, but I do. However, you could always have a mind map up on the screen and help yourself present to others the ideas by just following along with this mind map. The problem is that we've been trained to be impatient and to want it all now, and we don't see the value in these small little wins, word by word by word, or phrase by phrase by phrase. I just quoted something, right, from ancient Greek, from Thales, and I had to memorize it word by word by word, and I had to memorize the Greek, and I had to memorize the meaning in English, and it opened up so much knowledge because I was able to connect it with reading Stephen Kosslyn, right? And then that connects to another thing, and it connects to another thing, and it just opens up your perspective, it opens up your knowledge. So really, just memorizing anything is the path to memorizing more stuff. Anyway, that's our first thing here, the Greek tradition. And I find it really, really, really powerful to know as much as you can about that particular arm of the world. By the way, this here, and that's how I saw Tony Buzan himself teach, and Phil Chambers teach mind mapping from mind maps, and teach memory techniques also from mind maps, up on the wall, projected from a computer, and they were the mind maps that were created to help teach mind mapping, and it's very, very effective. It gets you into that sense of flow. And one thing that Tony did is he would have you recreate some of them with your own hand, which would then get you to develop those ideas through reproduction, which is a very intense and wonderful form of active learning, to have something enter your mind and then you reproduce it through your own hands, because you have to recall that information in order to reproduce it, which helps you learn it a lot faster. Mind mapping also follows a rule called personalization, which is part of the science of active learning. And personalization is when you make things your own by including images that mean something to you. So when you look at examples of people's mind maps, they might not be particularly meaningful to you, but that's because they're personalized to the creator. And we know from many scientific experiments that the more that you personalize things, the faster you're going to be able to learn. Another way that mind mapping helps, that follows the science of active learning, is that it is variety. And so we know active learning requires personalization and variety, which is one of the things that makes mind mapping and memory techniques related. Because in order for them to work at the highest possible level, they need to have you deeply engaging at a personal level and also having enough variety in order for you to be able to just get more of that brain working. One of my absolute favorite ways to use mind maps is not for creating presentations, but for creating stories, such as novels. And so this is a mind map of a story that I created, and it has a central image that is the core idea, the theme of the novel, and then the first little tendril here, tributary out from that central idea, is the name of the character. And then moving forward, I just follow the elements of plot and figure out how they're going to work. So I got a little ghost symbol there, and that's my way of expressing to myself what's haunting the character from the past, because in a good story there's always something that's haunting the character from the past. And then I may move through, what's the dynamic world, how is the world a barrier to this person, what is the driving ambition that the character has, what is going to be the dilemma that they face, that they dwell upon and they can't take action on until a crisis happens that forces them to take action, and then they have to have this complete sort of sequence of training, and maybe they need to gather allies, etc. And you just keep on going through. As long as you know what the rules of plot are, the mind map is a wonderful way to rapidly figure it all out, really in just 10 or 15 minutes, and then you got your whole plot and you're ready to sit down and write. Now, the mind map that I just showed you is the sequel for a book that I'm about to release, or I'm getting very close to it. I'm just editing the audiobook now, which took a very long time to record. But if you would like to get a preview of the audiobook and a PDF of the full novel, go to magneticmerrymethod.com/NS. And those who are interested in this novel of mine, it's not necessarily going to help you improve your memory, and it's not going to teach you mind mapping, but it's going to show you a detective who is losing his memory abilities, and his best friend helps him learn memory techniques so he can keep his job. And then those memory techniques become essential to him being able to solve the crime and save some lives in the end. Whoops, spoiler alert. Well, that's how most stories work, isn't it? Anyway, you can get a sample of that at magneticmarymethod.com/ns, and you'll really want to be involved if you like playing games, because I have created a game to go with the special launch of this novel, and that is going to be for people who have the sample first and foremost. So if you want to be involved in this, go to magneticmarymethod.com/ns. Thank you. This was my advertising spot that helps me not have to have sponsors, because I'm my own sponsor. And I hope you're going to like this book, because if it does help anybody with their memory, it's going to show them how a detective who has a very, very full schedule is able to figure out how to incorporate practice into his daily life. And then progressively throughout the story, it starts to switch on, and he really starts to understand how the memory techniques work. And then he's able to accomplish a relatively simple memory task that anybody could do within a week or two of practice. So there is verisimilitude in the novel to how this would actually work in real life if you were that detective. And that's what we're going to do in the game as well. So again, magneticmarymethod.com/ns, and I appreciate everybody who's been interested so far. I know you've emailed me and said, when is it coming? And I appreciate that interest too. It's just been a little bit slow. It rains here a lot, and I wasn't able to finish recording on schedule, and now there's a lot of editing to do, and I might have to re-record, and it's still raining a lot. So if you've been following the news in my region of the world, you know that it's been raining a lot, and hopefully it won't, rain too much anymore, because the ocean is brown with so much dirt from the rivers. But thank you so much for your patience, and I hope you're going to love this story. It has been so much fun to create, and the mind map for the sequel, well, I've written about 13% of the sequel already, and it was able to do that because I mind mapped it all out. So mind mapping for storytelling, perhaps a little less known, but something you too might want to explore if you love writing stories. Now, mind maps also have this incredible power that helps you concentrate and focus. And of course they do, because you are isolating yourself from distractions. I love to go out and mind map away from the devices, and I just get a big old stack of colors, because that's part of the principles that I learned from Tony Buzan, and it really, really helps. Because what you do is you start with that central image. Tony said that you should have 3 colors in the central image. Must it be 3? Well, I highly recommend that you do, because I found so many benefits from doing this. And I generally try to always have 3 colors as the central image. And then what I like to do is rotate through colors as I go around the circle as much as possible. I mean, I don't like to follow laws to the point that, is beholden to them. If you don't have that many colors or what have you, and you do a color twice, big deal. But just generally, I like to switch colors. And the logic of having 3 colors, switching colors, and so forth, I think it has something to do with diffuse thinking and why it works so well for me personally. In the science of learning and so forth, we know that when we put pressure on and then we take it off and have a break, that we tend to learn and remember more. And so we're focused on the central image, we're putting 3 colors, and then we think, okay, what's my first point going to be as you radiate out from that central idea? Well, then you choose a different color. Well, this is giving your mind a little bit of a break from the actual topic, and then you come back to the topic. So it's like Karate Kid, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off, but it's like pressure on, pressure off, pressure on, pressure off. And this just seems to make the ideas flow a lot better. But of course it would, because it puts you in a state of flow. You've given yourself this rule, 3 colors for the central image, and then I'm going to switch colors, and you're following it. So you're not thinking too much, you're just allowing thinking to do you, so to speak, as you proceed through the colors. So I absolutely love this for concentration and focus. And whenever I'm stuck on an idea, solving a problem, then it gives a kind of level of focus and concentration to the problem solving task, right? Because if you are sitting there and you're, oh, how am I going to solve this? And you're, walking around, or you're doing anything other than having a production of possible ideas, well, then you might not be coming to the solution as quickly as you could. This, I think, really comes together nicely with another technique I like to use for decision making and problem solving called the RAP technique. And I talk about that in my video on another kind of mind mapping called Ars Combinatoria, which is basically the Ramon Llull that I was talking about before, but also something that the great memory master Giordano Bruno used. So if you're interested in following with that, go down and look for the Ars Combinatoria video link in the description below. Now, of course, you got brainstorming for generating lots of ideas in terms of, what you want to do for your holiday or your retirement, all these kinds of different things that you can figure out. And it's much more engaging and colorful than it is having, sort of a top-down list or one of those Benjamin Franklin pros and cons lists where you draw a column down the center and you say the pros and the cons. Now, I still think that the Benjamin Franklin pros and cons list is also great. There's no reason not to do it, but you can also supplement it with mind mapping, and you can pluck different ideas out of your pros and cons list in order to mind map them and get even more ideas. And the other thing that I really love about mind mapping is that you don't need software. Now, of course, you can use various mind mapping softwares, but a lot of them, they wind up looking like concept maps rather than having this flow, or for me, creating this state of flow. I don't know about you, but I like to be off the computer as much as possible, not on the computer. I don't want another digital solution for things. I want to have as much of my brain operating with the non-digital world as possible so that I can be prepared to use my mind in those offline situations, which is precisely the way that we want to be, is equipped to solve problems and have solutions and remember what it is that we've learned when we're in the real world, when we can't be that person who's like, oh, I gotta look that up. We want to be able to remember it, or we want to be able to generate ideas spontaneously and get into that state of flow. So I think that mind mapping is just a lot better than concept maps for these reasons: concentration, solving problems, creating wonderful stories or presentations that we're going to give, and then making it more interesting and helping it to be more engaging for others to either reproduce our ideas in their own mind maps or copy our own, because they're not just these square grids or colored boxes on a screen. Now, you might be wondering, is there any research that demonstrates that mind mapping is effective? Well, Dr. Roger Sperry has done some research amongst several people that have done research on this, and he found that you are activating different parts of your brain. And it just stands to reason in terms of focusing and concentrating. Putting 3 colors down in that central image is obviously going to cause your brain to work in a different way. Rotating between colors as you go around in a circle is going to cause you to think in a different way that's going to activate different parts of your brain, which is part of why and how you start to think in different ways. And you could just imagine, if you get in the habit of going always in a clockwise circle, you might then create a pattern that clamps down on you, stiffens your ability. So you might once in a while want to go in a counterclockwise fashion. And likewise, you might want to use these different kinds of models, like a spider diagram and so forth, in order to really be able to see the difference. Contrast and comparison is itself a wonderful tool. So you don't always have to get locked down into the same thing. That said, though, I find that I really like this pattern and I revert to it naturally because there is something that feels very natural about it, and I think there's a lot of benefits and joy that comes from the way that it is activating what Dr. Sperry found in his research in terms of other parts of the brain coming to life. And what Sperry found too is that you get the best of both worlds, because you get your logic centers activated at the same time that you get your creative centers activated. So it's not as if just one half of the brain is lit up, but both sides are lit up very, very nicely, which is ultimately why mind maps are also potentially very good, not only for comprehension and understanding when you're applying them to your studies, but also to remembering what you studied, because you think about them both in terms of the creative aspects, you recreating the ideas through personalization and through variety of different ways of representing that information, but also because you think more logically about it and you're able to see connections or produce connections, which is another thing that mind maps help you do. If you want to get started with mind mapping and it would be your first mind map, then I would suggest that you bring together some of the ideas that Tony Buzan talked about and one that I've used very, very fruitfully when it comes to a particular goal. So the first thing to do before that you start mind mapping is think, what is my goal? Am I creating a presentation? Am I trying to understand something? Or am I trying to memorize something? So if you're trying to do something like tell a story, then I've given you an example of that, and all I did was just have the central theme of the story, and then I followed the plot rules. So this assumes that you know how a plot is constructed in order to help you figure out what those ideas are in a sequential order. But if you want to maybe memorize something, try this. Start with one concept that has multiple variables, whatever you think that might be that works for you. Or if you're learning a language, you could start with a theme. So imagine you are doing cooking in German, for example, and you put a piece of food in the center. Now, 3 colors is the suggestion there. So whatever, let's say it's a fish and you put in your 3 colors, and then you start to think about all the words related to cooking. And so, at 12 o'clock, you would have a word related to cooking. At 1 o'clock, you'd have another one. And then you would go clockwise in a pattern up to 12 different words related to cooking. Now, you have not all the words related to cooking, only 12, of course, but you have them in a memory palace fashion because you know where 12 o'clock is. It's directly north of your central image. And you go to 1 o'clock and so forth, and you have 12 words related to cooking. And this is a wonderful way to bring the two together, the mind map with the memory palace. And of course, you can change colors as you go, and that color could potentially help you remember what that word was. So if you had at 12 o'clock, I don't know, let me think of a German word for cooking, like Löffel, which if memory serves is spoon. And so now let's say that it's in green. So you could imagine that spoon, maybe there's a Roblo, Löffel, right? And L-O sort of sound, and he's spooning, I don't know, he's spooning himself full of truffles. Now you got that F sound, so Löffel, and then Roblo, Löffel, and he's full of truffles. So now you've got that, and because it's green, and 12 o'clock is your green, now they're green truffles. And then you can think back as you go later, what was that 12 o'clock? Oh, right, it was this green truffles. Oh, it was Roblo, Lo plus truffles and getting full, Löffel must be. Now, this is assuming that I remembered the correct word for spoon in German, but you would just proceed to 1 o'clock, and if you made a mistake, you would go back and fix it. And you can think of how that would apply to medical terminology, like you would have a medicine in the center, whatever it might be, and then you would have maybe 12 of the negative side effects. Well, maybe you want to start with the positive ones, but the idea would be you don't try to have it all, but you just have 12 and you circulate that around, and then you go in your mind and you have a perfect clockwise fashion. And you could also go backwards if you want and start at 11 p.m. and go that way as you please. But the idea is you have a perfect place locked in space on that mind map. And you don't really need a memory palace as such because you simply think of the mind map. So I have a mind map for a particular drug, at what was happening at 12 o'clock or at 11 o'clock or what have you. And you can also use all of the recall rehearsal rules that I teach at magneticmemorymethod.com. So it's a very, very wonderful way to use mind mapping in combination with a memory palace. And you can think of how this can apply to all kinds of things. Yes, it's limited because you don't have all the space for all the many things that you would in a full-blown memory palace. But if you can't remember 12 things, how are you going to remember 1200? All of which is to say that mind maps, whether they're on paper or digital, they do have the drawback of space being limited or easy to overwhelm with too much stuff. Because even if you have the unlimited space, or theoretically unlimited space, of a digital version of a mind map, you can still make it so overwhelmed with material that it would never be useful, and it would quickly get unuseful, as my early mind maps often tended to be. So this is one thing that Tony Buzan impressed upon me at dinner one night. He said, the rules will set you free. So however you mind map, I encourage you to think about rules and think about practicing applying them and holding yourself to those rules. And I don't know why I resisted it for so long, because I used the rules that govern the memory palace very, very religiously for a very, very long time. Or let's not say religiously, but in a very disciplined way. And sometimes when you know the rules, you're able to break them. But I was able to get so much more out of them by not trying to have it all, not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to constantly innovate, but sticking to a proven formula that works. And it's the same thing with mind mapping. When you just allow yourself to work within this framework using some of the suggestions we've talked about today, then you get much more out of it. And it just grows and grows, because if you focus on something like this as a disciplined practice, you're going to get better and better at it. And you're going to make discoveries precisely because you set limits. And that is why people like Da Vinci probably got a lot out of it, is because they had limits. And we know Da Vinci had limits because his drawings are all based upon particular formulas and rules. So if you're struggling to get forward in life, it may be because you just have all kinds of chaos going on, and you need to go back to what Tony Buzan said. The rules will set you free. The only thing is that you've got to find those rules so that you can adhere to them. Now, do you have to adhere to them forever and ever, amen? No, I don't think so. But what I do recommend is what I sometimes call the 90-day rule, or Metivier's razor, which means if you haven't really done something for at least 90 days and practiced it as a serious student, which means study the actual technique and implement it for at least 90 days, then you haven't really earned the right to say that you tried. Now that might sound brutal, but I think it's very true in so many cases. There are many, many skills that are simply never going to be learned with any degree of that robustness you need in order to even begin to understand how it could possibly help you if you're not willing to spend that much time. And in a lot of scientific research, we know that 90 days is approximately how long it takes for a habit to form. Your brain needs that long in order for all of the dopamine and the myelin sheaths to start doing their work, to form the deep neural connections that enable you to have that habit carry on as if on its own. There's so much more to say about mind mapping, but before I give you one last wonderful way to use mind maps, I want to thank our channel members. I want to thank everybody who has one of my books or my courses. If you would love to get a better memory and to experience so much more radiant thinking through techniques like the mind map and memory palaces, there's another video in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass called the Can't Miss Formula that takes this to the next level. And I just want to thank everybody who already has it. And if you don't know that it's there, it's in the FAQ section. Check it out. I think you'll find it revolutionary for your ability to create mind maps that work as memory palaces, and it is absolutely fantastic how all that works. It helped me a lot to have that combination together and working in flow for one of the hardest things that I had to do, which was pass level 3 in Mandarin. And this was during the spooky time when the world was about to go upside down. You might remember that time because it wasn't that long ago, and the focus and concentration needed was especially appreciated because of being able to combine these two techniques. So one thing that I find people have talked to me about in the comments here on YouTube and in email and so forth is that they have self-doubt. They lack confidence. And this really breaks my heart because it's really something that I've struggled with too. And it is one of the things that I'm so blessed that I was able to mind map the work that I do with Tony and to have some of his feedback and suggestions on what I do based on the mind map that I made for the future of my work. And that was just such a wonderful thing. And so much of what I mind mapped on there has come true. And it's a plan, but things happen. Life turns out differently no matter what's on the plan. But more or less, I still focus on that mind map that I created, and it's just been a wonderful guide precisely because it's there. It's something that can be referred to visually, and it can be referred to in the mind because it's a reminder of what you committed to do, even if new things happen. And this is really, really powerful because sometimes the ability to plan is more important than the plan itself. So I would highly recommend you use it for that. But in terms of using mind mapping to gain more confidence, well, in this case, I would love to give you an additional set of tips and strategies. And for that, I highly recommend you watch my video on using a memory journal in combination with 3 additional kinds of mind maps that help create confidence and clarity and this wonderful feeling that yes, you can do it. Now you've got to do all 3 of the mind maps that I talk about in that video in order to get the biggest possible benefits. So go ahead, hit that thumbs up if you haven't already, and watch my video on using a memory journal in combination with 3 special types of mind maps next.